everybody. Welcome to the 706 podcast, where we rate, review, and discuss the 706 greatest movies, in our opinion, of all time. I'm joined by my three co-hosts, Tony, Anthony, and Connor. Why don't you say hello in that order if you guys can manage it?
Tony.
Anthony.
Hey, everybody. I'm Connor.
Good job. Man, woman, camera. See, you guys could be president. You really could. So today we're discussing a movie that I nominated and Anthony so graciously chose based on the actual series of killings in the 1960s and 70s in the Bay Area in California. Very famous occurrence. The Zodiac killer is kind of part of our common nomenclature as far as crime and true crime and mysteries are concerned. So why don't we go around and let's hear some first impressions or even more developed impressions from our three co-hosts today. Let's do the tried and true. Tony, why don't you start us off with why this is the worst movie since Little Princess? Go ahead.
Okay. Well, first of all, this movie, I don't know. Never mind. I didn't have any pithy one-liners ready to go here. That's okay. No, this movie I'd seen it once before. There's a recurring theme. I keep going back to these movies I saw once like 10 years ago and barely remembered. Yeah, this is a really interesting like procedural. And I know that like it's a movie I hear about all the time. People are always talking about how great Zodiac is, and I remembered it vaguely. And watching it again, like I can see what everyone likes about it. I mean, it's a very like, I'll say first of all, the visuals of this movie are fantastic. This is one of the best looking movies ever. Both just like the set design, the art direction, the costuming, the makeup. It's so amazing. This is one of the best period pieces I've ever seen, especially considering it encompasses like about a decade in time, I think. And you can see with every cut to a new era, a new year, every time there's a big time gap, you can see that difference. And the cinematography in this movie is astonishing. Like the way those colors pop, and it just puts you, there's like this fluorescent lighting over everything almost, this like harsh lighting that almost makes you feel like you're sitting in an interrogation room. And it puts you in its setting more than almost any other movie I've ever seen. Like I feel like I'm watching the 1970s when I'm watching this movie. I don't feel like they made a movie about the 1970s and got a bunch of like 70s clothes and 70s props. It feels like I'm watching a transmission from that time, albeit with modern looking cinematography, which is quite a feat. Like everyone involved with that aspect of the movie deserves some kind of award. I don't know if this won the Oscar for best art direction and best costumes, but I don't know what it was up against, but it should have won because it was amazing. The editing also in this movie is so good. It's so slick. Like the cuts are so sharp and so funny. I was watching this with my friend Dylan, and he pointed out the scene where Robert Graysmith and what's Robert Downey Jr.'s character?
Right.
Paul Avery.
Paul Avery. They're out at the bar drinking, and he's like, "What's you're drinking?" And then there's a hard cut to all just the empty bottles of the tropical drink they're drinking. And there's so many great little moments like that, and these kind of sequences, for instance, where Jake Gyllenhaal goes on the date. And he gets the phone call from Paul Avery, and just like the cutting back and forth. And then there are sequences where you see different people doing different things in different time. And you see the cops and you see the reporters coming up with similar conclusions at similar times, going off of different information. And I think this movie is a masterclass in editing. And I think in all those technical departments, this movie is incredibly slick. It's like a really slick object with really smooth, nice surfaces, and that's kind of what I responded to the most, just the aesthetic appeal of the movie. But I mean, there's things there. The story is also good. It's also compelling. There's thematic things going on. I think the most impressive thing about this movie, it's a portrait of obviously obsession, right? Particularly in the Jake Gyllenhaal character, who's a newspaper cartoonist who becomes obsessed with solving these murders. And what I love about the depiction of his obsession with this killer is that it becomes not about the killer anymore. It becomes not about the fact that like there's a man who killed innocent people and he needs to be brought to justice. And that fundamental like moral duty of like justice and setting this right. It ceases to be about that very quickly. To him, it's a puzzle. He says, I love puzzles. And this is the one puzzle he can't quite solve, and it drives him insane. And whether he realizes it or not, that is the most important thing in his life, more important than his family, more important than his friends who he doesn't really have. That is his purpose in life. That is his goal. And what these cuts accomplish throughout the movie, there will be subtitles showing the time, an exact timestamp, a date and a time and a location, which is a trope of procedurals and like television dramas. But as the movie goes on, those gaps get bigger and bigger. And it becomes kind of this running commentary on just the cruel indifference of time. And whatever obsession you have, whatever focus you have, whatever you feel like you need to do, time will just go on. Life will just go on. The gears of history will turn indifferent to what you do or don't do. And I think there's something about that that's kind of existentially frightening. So I think this movie is more profound than just a mere kind of cool, true story about an unsolved murder, or series of murders rather. And the other thing too, one last note that I loved about this is the characters it depicts, the Mark Ruffalo character, the Robert Downey Jr. character, Jake Gyllenhaal, and the Zodiac Killer himself. These are men who have nothing in common, but they share this disease.
Alleged.
Alleged, yes. Well, no, I mean the killer, who we don't know who it is. I'm not talking about Lee. I'm talking about whoever the killer is.
Okay, whoever.
And all share this like disease, this need, this obsession, and they don't have anything else in common with each other, but they can bond over this shared need, this shared compulsion that they don't understand, that transcends morality. It transcends culture. It's just something they need and share. And I think the most heartbreaking moment of the movie is where Jake Gyllenhaal visits disgraced Devin Faraci on his houseboat and has to face him and see what he's become. And that moment will stay with me forever. So, yeah.
He had the PS5 though. That was pretty cool. He was running Pong.
He was playing Witcher.
Very proud of it. By the way, thank you, Tony, for that insightful and cutting analysis. I just want to say this movie, as a smoker, this movie is visually appealing. Let's just say that. And Robert Downey Jr., I think, did develop COPD over the 9-month shoot on this movie because every single scene he's smoking. But okay. Let's now go to Anthony, and then we'll have Connor close it out for the initial round. Go ahead, Anthony.
Sure. So I picked it, but I think Tony hit on a lot of the good technical parts. I think where the movie really works is it's sort of like a triumph of atmosphere the whole time from beginning to end, which feels a lot more quicker than its length time sort of suggests, is like perfectly paced. The atmosphere is at times like perfectly like horrific, particularly when the Zodiac killer's, in the car with that woman and her baby. That part is like so tense and so nicely developed and paced. Same with the part where the guy is on the sort of lake and, he's actually sort of like able to talk back to the guy, who's basically going to, hurt him and kill his partner at the time. But I think where for me, the movie actually kind of falls is the casting itself. So I don't know enough about the sort of like historical comparison or like how to compare it to the real people that are being depicted. I just don't know anything about that sort of case. I think Mark Ruffalo gives a sort of weird performance to me that feels very stilted at times. And at times it's just only the atmosphere that's keeping me going. And then Jake Gyllenhaal, I find way too handsome for that part. And at times it completely takes me out because I can't buy that sort of character being as sort of socially like outcasted of himself as he is. And the Chloe Sevigny, it's so weird to see her kind of thrown into the movie for about 30 seconds just to sort of give a quick realm of like pathos to that sort of character when she's not even developed. She's kind of just thrown in. There's no sense that I give in this movie for why she would like him. And all of a sudden she's just brought back to give a sort of family tension to that character, I felt like, in the last hour and a half. So all that sort of is on the thing. And I have to kind of ask myself is, it reminded me a lot of the way I have problems with The Social Network, which is when I really settle down to question the sort of characters themselves, I sometimes wonder why they're making their decisions they are, other than the fact that the atmosphere had to keep them going, if I'm thinking about the movie as a movie and not the historical part of it. And in a way, Tony was kind of talking about the sort of obsessionality of it, which to me feels kind of, I felt, but not enough. In a weird way, I was actually thinking of Night Moves, which I thought did a better job of this sort of earlier depiction of kind of quick obsession than the way I sort of felt Jake Gyllenhaal develop in the movie for me. But I will say, Robert Downey Jr., fantastic. I love that performance.
Well, I mean, you said you don't know why she even likes him. It's Jake Gyllenhaal. Like, what's the problem here? I don't understand. Even if he's like, Nazi sympathizer, he still looks like Jake Gyllenhaal. So, no,
Yeah.
that's not.
Well, I've interacted with personally, as a side note.
Oh, there we go, folks. Up here in New Kong City, we actually brush shoulders with the big stars. New Donk City, excuse me.
New Donk City, baby.
Yeah, there we go. All right, Connor, why don't you take us home?
All right. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say. I think you guys have fastened on a lot of points. I would say the thing that leaps out to me the most about this movie is its focus. Really, like, what really struck me was the casting, and I would say it was good in its way. I think the casting was one of the most important parts of this movie, and I think, right, having the kind of anchor, unlike perhaps other, sort of procedurals that we're dealing with, not necessarily with just the average, hard-boiled cop, but we have, right, our kind of adorkable Jake Gyllenhaal character, and we spend a lot of time, and kind of an energy in the movie, kind of laughing at him or laughing with him, or kind of learning to love him, right, through these kind of little cute moments of where he's constantly forgetting things, and Chloe Sevigny kind of acts as a foil for that. But I have to say, there's so many things about this movie, including, right, how the characters are used, that just, to me, they just don't feel very reflective. They don't feel like they really thought. They just, okay, we have to tell the story. How do we tell it? Well, we just go through, right, mentioning all of the important bits, right, here and there, right, throughout the years. For instance, like, I was quite kind of bored, kind of waiting as we have this sort of long period of initial investigation. We're kind of wondering what Jake Gyllenhaal is even doing there. Of course, then we realize, okay, that he's going to be kind of the star, particularly of the last, third of the movie, right, with his kind of personal investigation. And that was the part to me that was most interesting, right, is Jake Gyllenhaal really is the one who's taken over the case. I think that basically should have been the movie. Like, that other stuff kind of could have been background, and like I said, I just thought it was kind of unreflective and kind of, it was kind of long. I mean, I'm not against long movies, as you guys know, but, I thought there was this kind of lack of economy to the way the story was told. There's so many kind of blind alleys, and obviously that's part of telling a mystery story like this. But I thought, yeah, there was something, and certainly I thought the very ending was disappointing, right? If it indeed is about the obsession, it didn't really come across. I mean, there's kind of the final scene of when Jake Gyllenhaal finally encounters Lee, right, in person. Okay, that makes sense. But then we have another kind of coda in 1991, and it's just like, well, I guess they didn't want to mess with the chronology, but they could have, they could have mixed up the chronology a little bit. I think that would have been appropriate, right? But they're kind of just reading off a sort of a script, and there's moments where I think clearly the events of what really happened and the events that they're really trying to retell kind of conflict with the sort of character-based story they're trying to get across. For instance, we have this whole thing of Toschi, right, the Ruffalo's character, right, how he's basically having forged a letter, right, and like, it comes across as completely out of left field in the context of the film, because it's not something our film Ruffalo would actually do. But that's because they've already been so invested in portraying the character in a certain way, in a certain kind of relatable, way, that we've kind of missed the whole context of, why he wrote those letters to the editor of whatever paper. So anyway, I just thought there were a lot of things where the ball was dropped, though there were a lot of merits to it as well.
All right. Thank you, Connor. And also thank you, Anthony. Pretty much what I expected. I actually, Tony was more favorable than I thought, but let me just give my own kind of reflection on this movie. I've seen it probably half a dozen times, I guess. I would say also, I will add for context, I'm a big fan of true crime. I love almost anything related to true crime, though I'd like to say my taste kind of turns away from the more garish or hammy stuff, the kind of Lifetime movie stuff you'll find, more to things like this Zodiac that actually focuses on, it seems less exploitative in a way because it's more focused on kind of the case, the grit of it, the actual procedural work of the detectives, and in this case, the citizen detective in Graysmith. But yeah, I would agree with Tony. I think where this movie there aren't a lot, any soliloquies. There isn't much ambiguity to tackle, except for obviously the biggest mystery of all, and who is the Zodiac. And I think for me, where the art really shines is, like Tony said, in the atmosphere, but also in kind of the development of the audience's relationship to the movie. Where we start off, we're so, maybe you aren't. I was captivated by the initial murder. It's very kind of gruesome and sad, of course. And then we're kind of thrown into this web of uncertainty, and everyone in the movie is uncertain and trying to deal with a rapidly evolving situation. But at 26 minutes in, we have the last confirmed killing by this Zodiac character in the whole movie, and the movie is 2.5 hours long. So 2 hours of this movie are dealing with the aftermath of these killings. And I think that's the point that Fincher is trying to convey, is that it's almost as if you're waking up from a dream. Like Tony said, time is this immutable force. And the further we get away from the actual time of the events, the more facts are obfuscated, the more apathy is developed amongst the populace and amongst, the detectives and just society. And I think that this movie does a great job of making you feel that kind of almost a naturalistic way, how true crime can be dated at times, because you can feel like a case has kind of past its window. And so for me, seeing that and seeing Graysmith at the end grasping at straws, it's almost kind of gross in a way. You feel like his motives are a little bit kind of muddled or muddied, I guess. And I think that kind of is reflective of, my desire and my interest in true crime. It's like, am I more interested in the cases actually, in serving justice, or am I interested in a good mystery? Am I interested in the unknown, right? The movie builds up this Zodiac character, and we're so fascinated by him because in real life, not just in the movie, Zodiac is so part of our cultural fabric because he was never unmasked, at the same time being so present, so vocal, not literally, but through his letters. And we as a society, we were at a time where serial killers weren't really so common, at least, in the media. And so we grasped onto that. And I think ultimately, ironically, the overexposure led to the inability for this case to even ever be solved. So there's a lot of thoughts for me here, but I wanted to ask a question just in general, like if anybody has any thoughts on like their either aversion or interest in true crime, and where it kind of, do you see it as being kind of the Graysmith character? Do you see his motives, or do you find any fault with them, or do you think he remains at least ideologically pure to himself? And does that kind of reflect our interest with true crime and where our motives might become obscured, I guess? So anybody have anything on that?
I think Graysmith is just like a representation of, that desire for closure, for finality, the idea that we need to know something. And I think that like everyone has something in their life, whether or not they're interested in crime, whether or not they're interested in true crime, whether or not they're interested in serial killers or anything like that. Everyone has things in their own life that like happened, and they don't know how to deal with them. They don't know how to get over them. And time just continues. It just goes on, and everyone else kind of moves on and gets over it. And, things change, the seasons change, but you're hung up on this thing. And I think that the Mark Ruffalo character is someone who, while he shares that obsession, he shares that need, and that's why he's a detective in the first place, he is able to find that balance, or he's able to go back to reality and accept that there are things in this world that we're not going to know. Because the universe doesn't care whether we know or not. This universe doesn't care about our obsession, our internal drive that's burning us up. And I think Ruffalo comes to terms with this. Graysmith doesn't come to terms with it. And then Robert Downey Jr. lets it just destroy him. It lets him burn him into a husk. So I think they represent kind of three different avenues we can take with that fundamental human desire to know things that we can't know.
Yeah.
But isn't there sort of like at least in the way like the movie presents it, is Graysmith's sort of interest in the case kind of fascinates me because he starts off, he's a cartoonist, he overhears the conversation and decides to take an interest based on that sort of letter, right? The idea of solving it then. But is it at the same time, is it also the sort of just want of kind of like, in a way, like a sort of minor fame? Like if he's so interested in solving it, though, he's also doing things, as Kirk was saying, that put the case at risk. Like we know more common now that like obviously over media saturation can, make things harder to solve. But at the time, he's putting himself on the line. He's told like not to necessarily go to the press, and then he's told later on not to go to the news. Don't put your name out there. You're putting your family in danger, but you're putting yourself in danger. And then at the same time, he's also very open about shopping that book around. Right after the moment, we see David Toshki basically be loosely adapted for Dirty Harry, and also the inspiration for Bullet. Like, they're frequently joking about him being, Bullet, the Steve McQueen movie.
I mean, I think the Toski character, he calls other people Bullet, right? I mean, his point is kind of like, yes, he does talk about red tape, but ultimately by the end, right, the difference between him and Gyllenhaal's character, right, is that ultimately, right, Gyllenhaal's character is not constrained by legal proceedings. Yeah. He can solve the case, so to speak, right, but it can't do anything legal about it. And that's ultimately just a big difference, right?
There's an interesting parallel here. About 10 years later, a little less than 10 years later, a string of serial rapes occurred in the Sacramento area, down into the Valley, Inland Empire area, and then some murders occurred about, another decade later in Southern California. A series was made about it based on the book that was written about it called I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. And it's very interesting because it hits a lot of the same beats, right? The idea that what Michelle describes as, like Tony said, this need to know, this need to unmask, right? These ominous figures loom so large in our dreams, right, in our nightmares. But once they're unmasked, they're quite pathetic almost. And we see their neuroses. We tend to see less of their ability to elude us and to frighten us, and more of their ability or more of their inability to adapt to society, or, see their compulsive behaviors as kind of pathetic, right, or in need of fixing. But it's an interesting thing, because even then you see how society, localized, this region has adapted to the idea of a dangerous person being out and not knowing if at any time you might come across an untimely demise. And it's only developed obviously further and further, and our jurisprudence and our investigative prowess has developed, of course. But it was an interesting period where we were there was this incipient development of technology that could potentially track people, killers, but it was by no means thorough or rugged enough to actually pin them down. And so this is an era where serial killers had all the benefit of the fame and the notoriety with none of the risk, or at least a severely diminished risk of being actually caught. And I want to segue that into a question for Connor. How do you see this changing today vis-a-vis, like, how have you gotten away with what I mean?
Don't talk about that, Kirk.
No, never mind. I can't. Hypothetically, if you were to if you were to write a book and use O.J. Simpson as the ghostwriter, and if you did do it, what do you think that is? Like, was it more, they knew, is the serial killer, I guess my question, is the serial killer gone, right? Is this a phenomenon of the 20th century, early 21st century? Is it like with genetic testing, with all of the, GPS, is this something a social problem we don't necessarily have to worry about anymore?
I think absolutely it could still happen. I'm sure there's ways around it, but yeah, it's hard to imagine anything like, obviously the Zodiac could not have done any of what he did, right? So many issues in this movie would be resolved so quickly, right, by the existence of cell phones and cell phone cameras, and definitely I was reflecting on that as I was watching. But yeah, I guess obviously we have some similar things. I mean, I think almost what we have more in our society now is kind of not the serial killer, but the kind of the mass killer, right? The sort of spree killer, which I guess has a sort of almost a similar, well, obviously there's not a sort of detective element to it, but there is still a kind of weird fascination, still maybe similar dynamics of isolation and the desire for kind of the so-called herostratic fame, fame for doing something bad out of a desire for self-aggrandizement. And I think there's still a curious dynamic of fascination with those people. I guess, that would be a parallel. But yeah, is it true? I guess it must be less common, right? That things can go quite this cold. But then, obviously too, just it's a fact of the legal system that sometimes these cases kind of can't be solved. And of just the way, the precautions you have to take, right?
Anybody else have any thoughts?
I think I think there might be an element of like going along with the theme of time and like the march of history. There is something going along with that idea that like maybe this couldn't happen today or could happen in the same way. I think there's something maybe tragic that Robert Graysmith was born at this time, like the only time in history where the Zodiac killer could have happened in the way he did, when this media infrastructure existed such that it could become a media phenomenon and he could send letters to the paper and all this, but it's predates cell phones and all this thing. So it's actually a very narrow window where this kind of serial killer phenomenon could have actually happened. And this guy had the misfortune of being born at a time when we would have to bear witness to that, and he would be tempted by that kind of puzzle. Now, maybe if you were in a different time,
or the fortune in a way, right? Or the fortune, he had the fortune in a way, because that's what made it a mystery, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
could have just traced his call instantly, right, to the TV station, right? Wouldn't have had the mystery.
And where's the fun of that? Yeah.
Well, there's sort of like the two things is like, one, it's like also like the sort of media aspect of it is like, for like the average person, like I always hear my parents or grandparents talk about this, or Shay's parents, but like Ted Bundy, for instance, I remember like Shay's like mom was at like an all-female, I think like sort of dorm, and the fear of like, you would hear a news story and things would go silent for days, weeks. And so there's certainly an amount of like fear that's like building up over time too, not knowing like when the next strike is going to hit, which is obviously gone a little bit now, because if anything's out there, like you're going to hear things constantly. But I think on the flip side is like Connor's thinking about like the mass like killers. Like I was thinking of the guy who conducted the mass assault in Vegas. There's something like the most terrifying thing about him, right, is like they could not come up with a sort of psychological profile that they deemed close to definitive. But at the same time, I weirdly enough, this may just be me, but I weirdly enough don't hear about him in the same way I do about some of the other people, particularly Virginia Tech, Dylan Roof, the guy in Norway. And I don't know if it is because of that fear that we could not figure it out, or if it's like my own circle that just because of those other ones are more racially pertinent to the sort of conversations today, that may be there. But like, I was thinking about that the way Kirk brought it up.
Yeah. The transition from the serial killing to the mass killing is certainly an interesting through line to explore for someone, and I'm sure many have. But, I think what you were talking about, like Ted Bundy, like people can recount where they were, what was happening when certain horrifying, horrible events happened. And in a way that's unifying, right? San Francisco was such a diverse, such a kind of volatile environment in the 60s and 70s, yet all these communities, these divergent communities, were somehow able to kind of, the fear of the masked kind of killer phantom, that's universal, right? In any culture, that translates across any culture, any belief system. The idea of brutality and anonymity, and that frightens us. And so it's something very tribal there that we're able to connect with people through tragedy in a way, especially one that seems so non-discriminate, right? I think that's one thing. Another thing is, just rounding it out, the Zodiac, I think, has so much power because, like I said, he's been so vocal and eluded capture. And so why people are actually still working on this case 50 years later, people are still interested in this case because they feel like the evidence has to be there when in fact it really isn't. There isn't evidence there. And that's the same thing with like an instance, if you've heard of like the Delphi murders, where these two girls were murdered on a bridge. in 2017, and we had video of the killer, right? So, okay, that must mean we have the guy. Well, no, we don't. And that only fuels the obsession, right? We get a piece to the puzzle, but we don't have the rest of the puzzle. And that can break some people. And I think that's kind of reflective of our society, right? We get these little snippets of truth in kind of thunderstorm of misinformation, and we try to seek out the rest of the truth, and we try to put the puzzle together, only to find out that the puzzle isn't actually a puzzle at all. And so it was never assembled to begin with. Anyways, I do have one final question on a lighter note, and I'm gonna read some movies here, and it's quite the list. Okay, so I have, starting in 2008, Iron Man. Let's see, Tropic Thunder, Sherlock Holmes, Due Date, The Avengers, The Judge, Civil War, Infinity War, Endgame, Doolittle, great stuff. Sherlock Holmes 3, pre-production. So anyways, I think you guys know where I'm going with this, and I need Anthony to kind of give us a little bit here. What happened to Mr. Downey Jr.? I guess I'll be more direct in my question. When he latched on to the Iron Man character, did he actually believe, was he a total sellout, or did he believe there was enough artistry in that character, in the Tony Stark character, to actually like kind of fulfill his urge as a creator and actor? Or does he not have that urge anymore?
I didn't follow the whole Marvel world to the end. I still haven't seen, Endgame Part 2, any of them. But I will say is I definitely felt like by the time Spider-Man Far From Home came along, however much artistic merit Downey Jr. believed in those movies was gone. I think he was phoning it in completely at that point. But I will say also Tropic Thunder, and then a few years before that, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. Such a fantastic movie. But it's like Tropic Thunder is such a bold choice. Even more bold the more I look back on it. And I just wish Downey Jr. took some chances again.
Isn't it amazing to think that he was nominated for an Oscar for Tropic Thunder? Isn't that crazy to imagine?
Yeah, really?
He was Oscar nominated for that role.
One year later, and it would not have been made.
Those antediluvian days. It's impossible to imagine.
It's up there with the White Man's Burden film that you told me about.
Our grandkids are going to look up this podcast and hear us praise Tropic Thunder and cry and be like, how could you have liked that?
Oh, my God.
It was a different time. I'm sorry.
Children, forgive me.
Tony, Connor, any thoughts on Downey Jr. or even someone like Johnny Depp? Are they delusional, or are they merely satisfied, or are they totally avaricial and just total greed monsters, and they're in it only for the cut, right? What is it? Is it just a job? Is that okay?
I think I don't know if it's morally bad. I mean, whatever. Yeah, I'd like to see him take more risks. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think he's in it for the money. I mean, he got points on the Avengers. That's unheard of. He made so much money off those movies. He made an obscene amount of money on those movies, I have to imagine that's what motivated him. I think it's kind of an open secret that by the end, he was ready to be done with that character. I think that the first Iron Man is a very good performance, and I think he probably enjoyed playing that character. But after doing it 4 or 5 times, he's probably okay, it was a paycheck. That's my.
And 30 other times in 5-minute cameos, in every other movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. And me personally, Kirk, I can't say I'm a big fan. I don't, he doesn't really speak to me. I do get the appeal, and I do like him in Iron Man. I do like him in the first Iron Man. I thought that was pretty cool take on the character. Boy. But yeah, I guess he's not one of my guys. He's no Paul Dano or whatever my guys are. Yeah, and in this movie too, I felt almost like I was watching Jack Sparrow kind of strut around in a way, which there was a slight aspect of importance to that. Like I said, that was a definite choice to make these characters kind of likable and kind of lovable. But it kind of fell flat for me in this movie too.
Yeah. Well, that's fair. I think this movie can hit people different ways for sure. one, because it's so long, it gives you so much time to like change your mind, right? But also because, you know, it doesn't really conform to most structures in movies we see nowadays. I don't know if this movie, you know, would even get, you know, the green light 10 years, you know, and I'm not saying you're a victim of that, but I'm just saying this movie is unique in that way. Anyways, let's head on to the voting portion. Seems like a lost cause, but you never know. Maybe my friend Abraham Lincoln will have a vote too. I'm holding up a $5 bill.
We sell out real cheap. We're not like Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, I'll give you points.
Actually, Venmo me, Kirk.
Points on the podcast. Yes.
Yeah, it will. Any MeUndies ad we run, I'll give you 10%. Anyways, all right, go ahead. I don't know. Go ahead, Anthony.
Sure. Well, I will say is I will also defend Robert Downey Jr. in Sherlock Holmes. It's a much more interesting movie than he gives it credit for. And I know Tony's a big Benedict Cumberbatch fan, but you know,
Cumberbatch
whatever his name is, Downey Jr. is the definitive Sherlock Holmes. But I will also I really like that you just threw out all the most grandizing, narrativizing questions, Kirk. You know, some really interesting philosophical dilemmas here. It's like The Hunt, you know. So I appreciate that, and I like the way you tied it into
sort of Kirk's trademark. He asks the big questions.
It's kind of the question of, you know, how do we get to our contemporary cultures, our own, you know, Frederick Jameson, you know. But yeah, I'm gonna say the movie didn't do it for me, Kirk.
That's fair.
It's a no.
Oh.
That's all right. Tony, go ahead.
All right, one last note on the movie that I'm shocked no one brought up. Like, you mentioned being kind of vague. I think Anthony mentioned not loving the casting, but like the casting of all the minor characters is so good. There are so many just like dudes in this movie. There are so many great dudes, so many great faces, so many great little moments of performance. Oh my God, I'm shocked that didn't resonate with you guys more. I was so delighted in every scene by like who I would see show up, and like everyone had like a great little moment. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, yes, I'm an easy yes. What?
Who are we talking about?
Well, like Philip Baker Hall, but like people I'd seen in other things, I don't necessarily know their name, but I feel like everyone was just so perfectly cast. Like the newspaper editor in chief, like the other cop at the villa. What's the other town? The other station. Like all those guys were just so perfect. Like I don't know. I thought that was really impeccable for me at least. But no, I'm an easy yes. I think this is a great movie.
All right, fair enough. And Connor.
As for me, you can probably predict where I went. Yeah, I mean. Yeah, I still feel, though, Kirk, you made an excellent point, and Tony, I think you may have also mentioned it, about the length. That was a really good point. I think you sold me on that as part of the design, and that was kind of the part of the problem is I wasn't seeing, you know, kind of where the thought was coming into it. I still think, right, they could have been a bit freer. They could have freed themselves from the chronology a little bit to underline certain things, you know. How much of the killing did we need to see versus what didn't we? Should we not have seen any of it? I think, you know, I guess now I'm just saying that I would tell the story differently, which I guess is not really a fair critique. But yeah, there's lots of aspects of it that just didn't really like come together for me in the end. Though I definitely, after talking with you guys, I see a lot more of the merits. Yeah. So I would have to say no.
Okay. Well, I'll give you three things in its favor. One, did you guys see the Edward G. Robinson poster?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was great.
That was cool.
Also, I think this movie just inundates you with facts by design. I think that's a great thing. Yeah. And it's meant to disorient us and kind of get us like, you know, we're kind of meant to feel a little disillusioned and feel it's like a disproportionate almost reaction to the murders. But anyways, that's for another time. Let's go on to the final portion of our podcast episode where my three esteemed co-hosts are going to nominate a film that I will choose, well, from which I will choose one, and we'll see who'd like to go. I think Tony has gone least recently, so Tony gets to decide the order. Go ahead, Tony.
I'll go first just because but first I have to ask Connor a question. Connor, how much of Twin Peaks have you seen?
Season 1.
Okay. Maybe not then. I was going to suggest Fire Walk with Me because like,
I can catch up. I can catch up.
Catch up in a week. You're going to watch season 2. I mean, I don't know. I'm hesitant, but once you watch season 2, we'll watch Fire Walk with Me.
Okay, sorry.
And we just did Blue Velvet, so
throw a wrench in the works.
Great movie,
no, I'm going to pitch a movie I pitched not very long ago because I want to do it. Mishima, A Life in 4 Chapters, about the Japanese writer and fascist man. by Paul Schrader.
Yeah. Okay, you guys, it's really time now. I'm really serious about this. We need a Kurosawa movie. Okay, I'm going to recommend a different one. This one has no samurai in it. Takes place in the modern day. This is 1955's I Live in Fear. And not necessarily one of his most respected movies, but it's a real personal favorite of mine. It takes place in the modern day, and it's really about kind of the existential angst of living, right? And kind of especially, right, living in Japan in the 1950s with the existential dread of kind of Cold War era atomic annihilation. And there's something obviously very relatable, I think, about it in today's climate. I think it's just a beautiful film. It's much more, I think it's not an epic, right? It's rather short for a Kurosawa movie. So it's under 2 hours.
Oh.
And yeah, I think you all would, I would love for you all to see it. I'll put it that way.
Interesting. There's just some real high-mindy choices. Kurosawa and Paul Schrader.
Yeah, yours has to be
right,
Japanese
Kirk.
too.
All right, Kirk. We're going to stick with the 2000s because I think it's time that you've seen 2013's The Double. It's a Richard Ayoade film starring, I know you don't like him, starring Jesse Eisenberg. And it's a sort of Terry Gilliam-esque meets dark humor, meets the horrors of modern day bureaucracy as a man confronts a double. Very interesting movie. Very fascinating.
Based on a Jesse Eisenberg's novel. Kirk. There's two of them. Think about that.
This is, I will say, the only time I actually have ever been impressed by his acting. No, okay. Night Moves doesn't count.
Well, Tony. let's hear some rebuttals. I'm a little I'm a little perplexed. Go ahead, folks. Tony, give me more on Mishima. I forgot.
So it's a biopic, but it's not just a biopic. It's a very expressionistic, very colorful, very interesting biopic in the way it chooses to present this guy's life. Basically, it kind of intercuts this event, a discrete event happening that's very dramatic and very intense, with these excerpts from both his past and from stories that he wrote, because he's a writer. And the stories he wrote kind of shed light on his psychology and who he is and his life. And it's a fascinating portrait of like a human psychology and pain and just this urgent desire to do something. And I find it very relatable. And it's sort of like, what do we do with that need to do something, to make a mark on the world in a person who we think is maybe evil or has some very misguided ideas? And how do you reconcile that fundamental human need, that fundamental human desire with when that person has some very, if taken to their logical conclusion, some very dangerous ideas. And I find that incredibly provocative and interesting. And I think it's an incredibly beautiful cinematic experience. You know, I think it's Paul Schrader's best directing ever, even if First Reformed is my favorite movie overall.
Okay. Good job. Well said. Tony or Anthony or Connor have anything?
Yeah, I've seen both of their movies. They're both quite good. Mishima I didn't love as much as Tony, but I would say obviously if you're interested in the writer Mishima or that kind of thing, right? Someone who maybe out of his kind of artistic principles, right, pursue this kind of fascistic ideology, I think, yeah, definitely check it out. I would forward my critiques when we watch it. I'm not sure where my vote would land. Whereas The Double, on paper, it's like the ultimate Connor movie. It's like a Terry Gilliam style adaptation of a Dostoevsky movie. Maybe for that reason, I was a little disappointed by it, but I don't want to get into that. But I don't know if that really counts as a rebuttal. But I think you would like my movie, Kirk. I think it's a very reined in and very kind of nice, not warm, but kind of a sentimental and a very emotional kind of take on human psychology with a kind of, I don't know, with a warmth to it that I think we would enjoy.
Are you saying I have a mawkish sentimentality, Connor?
No, I don't think so.
I'm just kidding.
But
my ears are perked up for the buzzwords you guys try to throw my way.
Yeah.
Let's just say my movie's about a social worker.
Yeah.
Anthony, do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, Tony throws out Paul Schrader, and it's a bit like, forcing myself into a sort of academic exercise. But, Connor's movie, I don't really know. As I was kind of watching him talk about it, though, I didn't see that Kirk energy, that Kirk picking up. I think The Double, when I first saw it, was also a disappointment. But I came around to it last year again, and I was really amazed by it. I think the way the movie talks about and reflects on the sort of situation of loneliness in the kind of modern city, even if it kind of wants to sort of give it to us in a sort of surrealistic lens, I think is so wonderfully handled. And the way loneliness is tackled as something that also could bring a sort of detriment. What happens when our own loneliness actually harms others is something the movie does quite well. So that's my vote for The Double.
All right. Well said, one and all. This is
Poor Kirk.
These aren't normally Kirk movies, I will say that.
What's that?
On the surface, these aren't normally Kirk.
Yeah, I was going to say,
nomination.
these aren't the most appropriate selections, but that's neither here nor there, because once again, like I said, it's an opportunity to experience something. Sounds like you guys have all seen. Tony, have you seen The Double?
I haven't seen the Kurosawa. I've seen The Double. I do like The Double.
I haven't seen Connor's movie.
Kurosawa.
Wait, have you seen Mishima?
Me?
Anthony?
No, I tried to start it once, remember, and I didn't keep on.
Well, there we go. But yeah, I mean, there's some familiarity there, at least with the directors. So, I'm going to be a little selfish. I'm going to kind of gravitate towards a film I feel like I would probably, this is a tough one, guys. Let me just relish in this moment of power.
Just choose none, Kirk. It's fine.
None of the above. New ones.
Yeah, no.
He's gonna have us watch Inception again.
Anthony, this is a layup for you, but then you.
We'll all get together and watch Tenet, okay?
You do a fucking Jesse Eisenberg movie, and I hate that guy. I almost hate him as much as Jonah Hill. Let me see.
That was part of the fun, though, of nominating it.
I'm going to find a movie with 2 Jonah Hills next.
2 Jonah Hills and 1 Michael Pitt.
You know what? Man. I think I'm actually, Anthony, I'm going to challenge myself once again, and I'm going to go with your movie. Because if nothing else, I will have a scathing review of Jesse Eisenberg's acting. And, yeah, I feel bad. I mean, both your other films sound interesting to me. Who the fuck do there's probably a better movie in there, but a movie that could be interesting to me and I want to see might be The Double, but I do want to see the other 2 as well. So it was a hard choice, but thank you one and all for your nominations. And I guess that'll do it for us, folks. Until we return again with The Double, we will see you next time. See you next time.
I'll have what she's having.
No, I'll have what she's having.